welcome to Eric Mandel presenting for the five synagogues of the White Plains Israel Action Committee. I'm Alan Septimus, Eric Mandel, and we also have Dean Unger on the call. Dean is the chairman of the committee. Eric has a long history with this committee, which he founded, and he's going to speak to that. I want to thank Eric for presenting. Very busy schedule, this man, and we're privileged to have him. Eric, take it away. Oh, one more point. Eric will be presenting for 1 hour approximately. When he sums up, we'll have ample period for Q&A. If you have questions, use the function at the bottom of the screen and Zoom me, Alan Septimus. Send questions to me. I'll consolidate questions and present questions for Eric. Eric, thank you.
Just to clarify, it's the chat, the little button at the bottom that says chat. That's what you're going to click, and then you can type your questions into there.
And thank you, Leah. She's operating behind the screens, and she is what enables this to happen. Thank you, Leah.
So thank you, Alan. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Dean. This is my old stomping ground, being at the five synagogues. It's where I raised my family, and it's very special. I've spoken many times, but every time is always special. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. I just wanted to mention I was a co-founder of the five synagogues back in 2000 with Dr. John Lightstone from Hebrew Institute. And he unfortunately, before his time, passed away. And I'd like to dedicate this to John and his family, where we brought five synagogues of four denominations together to work for Israel, and let us hope that that can continue for years to come. So we have a lot to do. So let's get right to business. I wanted to start with a picture that was about 6 months ago, and that was I was in Doha on one of my missions that I lead, and I met with the Qatari ambassador to Gaza. And I followed up a meeting with one of the Altanis in Washington at the Qatari mission. And I was invited to go into Gaza this fall to meet with Hamas, and they had guaranteed my safety. So I'm glad that didn't happen. But just to give you an idea of the range of people that I do meet, that's me at Al Jazeera in Doha. This is me with the Saudi security team. I have very good relations with many of the Saudis, and that's actually the Saudi Iran think tank. Those are two of the last three ambassadors from Saudi Arabia to Iran, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in the program. Here is what we talk about all the time. That this is me at the Rafah crossing. This is the entryway from Sinai, Egypt, into Gaza for humanitarian aid, along with Kerem Shalom. And I show this old picture not because you guys can remember me when I was and looking younger and less gray hair, but this was 40 minutes after our group had met with a leader of Hamas in the West Bank. And when we asked this Palestinian Authority official, who is the Minister of the Interior, we told them that we had just met with the leader of Hamas, and he had said to us, "Where is he? We want to go arrest him." And that goes back a ways. So I happen to have been intentionally at the massacre on Saturday, October 7th. I was in a little sleepy village called Yerucham in the Negev. Things were going on. I called my fellow journalist in the Jerusalem Post, Seth Franzman, and we both headed. And so I went to Sderot on Saturday, October 7th. It was Simchat Torah and Shabbat. And these are my own pictures. Most everything you'll see here will be my own pictures. This was the very first thing as I drove in, no IDF troops, of a civilian who was killed. This was a supermarket that was shot up. And then I started coming upon one of the scenes of the massacre. And this is what I saw. It was surreal. I was there during the first week. I was there again in December at the front lines. And this is actually a picture with me on the northern border. And there's a real war there. This is looking out into Lebanon through a bunker. These are the massive tractors to bulldozers that clear debris away. This was a suicide drone attack that killed a 53-year-old Israeli reservist in the north. Place I was in was called Margaliot, near Metula, literally right on the border. I turned to somebody, one of the soldiers during a pause, and I said, "Where do you live?" Just not asking, and he just turned and he pointed through the bunker at his house in Margaliot, sort of just over the horizon over there, less than half a mile away. I was with drone operators. Drones are in this sort of thermal imaging of drones. I can tell you from the 2012 war, the 2014 war, I've been in live fire. I've watched in real time, in videos. I can just tell you that the integrity and the morality of the army in trying to avoid civilians is extraordinary. So the obscenity of Israel targeting Israelis, targeting Palestinians indiscriminately, or in this case, Lebanese civilians, is a blood libel. And I can just tell you that firsthand. And this is some of my experiences in, these are Israeli bunker fortifications. And just to show you, what did I show you this kind of broken net? One of the most feared things in the north is Kornet missiles. They're Russian-made missiles. They're deadly. They're anti-tank missiles. That's what they're supposed to be. They have, their range is up to 8 miles, and they're being used primarily against civilians. But here, when they attack an Israeli post, they didn't know how to stop them. They couldn't use Iron Dome or any of those type of things. They don't have Iron Beam, the laser system yet. So they put up these fences, and that fence on the right had deflected a Kornet missile from a direct strike. I met with the leadership team of Kiryat Shmona, that's the mayor there, and I also met with the regional council of these 80 to 120,000. They're in charge of civilians in the north, and they are not going to go back. The people don't go back until they feel secure. That means that, and we'll get to the northern border a little later. I was at Kfar Aza. Kfar Aza was one of the most devastated hit communities. And it just showing a few pictures. This picture, the bottom upper right one is not mine. The bottom left is mine. But if you look at the bottom left, that's the fence into Gaza. If you look just to the right of the soldiers, that's the fence where it was smashed and broken. If you look in the upper right, that's what it looked like in real time. One of the 28 to 30 coordinated crossings that Hamas came in. And if there's one thing, I'm not going to talk about the operational intelligence failure. They speak for themselves. But I will tell you, it was underestimating the sophistication of the adversaries. This area, one of the ones that's focused on, was all of the young people who live in Kfar Aza. And just one scene was more gruesome than the next. You see those numbers over to the buildings. That was with the troops that would go through. The ones that looked, were there any bodies in there, or any terrorists in there? It was a check for booby traps, and each unit that would come and leaves a mark on there. And this on the left, you could just see, the random bullet holes that have many of these pictures, just going into civilian homes and just shooting them up. And this is actually Israeli reserve soldiers who are fighting in Gaza, who they brought them for a short time to Kfar Aza from Gaza, just to remind them what they're fighting for. And while I was there, just one of the, I don't know, there was a very famous attack, a heroic episode where a boyfriend and girlfriend, a grenade was thrown in. The boyfriend jumped on the grenade and saved his girlfriend's life, and he perished, unfortunately. And I was there when the girlfriend had come back, to retrieve some belongings. I mean, the stuff is just beyond heartbreaking. This is my picture of Gaza, and you can see some of the devastation. This is in the north, and that is live fire while I was there. So with a little background, just to give you a flavor of where and what I've done, we're going to talk about sort of an Israel update with Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. So I want to start with some good news, okay? The vast majority of Americans, according to a Harvard Caps Harris poll, back Israel. 80% overall support Israel. It's mind-boggling. 20% of Americans, 1 in 5, side with Hamas. The one that's, of course, most disturbing is the second one. 43% of young Gen Zs support Hamas. There was another Harris-Harvard poll last month that said 64% of Gen Zs think of Jews, and I'm talking about Israelis, Jews, as oppressors. 2/3 of Gen Zs polled think Jews are oppressors. almost the definition of anti-Semitism. So what do Israelis think? By the way, one of the things that we don't know, and when I go there, I really learn a lot about, is what Israelis think. So 75% of Jewish Israelis don't think Israel should give in to U.S. demands to shift the phase of the war. Remember, many of the Israelis, we know about the hostage families and the heartbreak involved there, but many of the families of soldiers who have died, and there's over 500 soldiers overall that have died, don't want their lives to be in vain, that Israel leaves Hamas standing. And 65% of Jewish citizens believe that continuing fighting is the most effective way to get out hostages, despite what we hear about the hostage families. And this is from just a few days ago, the Tel Aviv University Peace Index survey, that at the end of this war, we always talk about the day after, 69% of Israeli Jews favor Israeli control over Gaza, 25% international or regional forces, but only 2% favor Palestinian Authority control. And I'll emphasize what a little bit later. And look at this, over 90% of Israelis, 94%, think the IDF has used either appropriate force or too little force. So different than American Jewry. And most Israelis, 2/3, do not support a Palestinian state. They think it's, President Herzog, not somebody from the hard right, made it very clear. How can you be talking about two-state solution at this point in the middle of this war, and Israel's are so traumatized? By the way, when you say two states, please do not say two states. Say two states for two peoples, because when I go to the Palestinian Authority and I speak to Fatah and the PLO, two states means basically two Arab states, one Arab state totally in the West Bank, and a binational state that would be demographically overrun with a complete right of return. So in other words, two Arab states. It means very different. I had this conversation years ago with our old friend Nita Lowy when I pointed it out to her. So how successful is what Israel is doing? So I'm going to give you two things. Israelis say we're doing really good. If you saw Bibi's comments, that we're doing this morning, we're doing even better than expected. Half of Hamas battalions destroyed, 1/3 of the gunmen have been killed. American intelligence is much more cautious. It says Israel has only eliminated 20 to 30% of the Hamas terrorists, and they still have significant ammunition and combat capabilities. It is a very, very challenging situation. In any case, we don't know how many terrorists there are, and there's a continuum of complicity to the civilian population. I'm using a term from Alan Dershowitz. It'll be in an article I'll be writing this week. So the next phase of this war, if it continues, and we can talk about what the latest hostage deal is, it's already going on in Khan Yunis, but I wrote a piece last week, I think it was either The Hill or The Messenger, or Jerusalem Post, I forget, basically that Israel must control the Philadelphia corridor. That's the 8.9-mile border. And I'll show you some maps so everybody can, I'm not just saying these things, I want to make sure everybody understands. That's the border, 8.9 miles between Sinai and Gaza, that has allowed Hamas to become a terrorist army. This, to destroy the tunnels, is going to take forever. They now believe, that there are 450 miles of tunnels underneath. And most latest survey believe is that 80% of the tunnels are still intact. One of the things the combat engineers, which at one point I spent a little time with, not at this time, but in a previous time, they can dismantle and destroy tunnels. They are totally unprepared to deal with the situation where there are hostages trying to be saved, that they know are in the tunnels, which is inhibiting what's going on. The two things work together and work apart. Operationally, which more important, to defeat Hamas or to get the hostages out? Can you do both? Remember, Hamas's strategy revolves around the tunnels. It's their center of gravity. But our goal as Americans, and I speak to Congress about, and when I try to give them more nuances, our goal is to end this war as soon as possible. President is in a difficult position as he's in an election year, and there's a strong push against this war continuing. And the president does not want there to be a regional war, just wants it to suppress Israel in the north. But one of the things I believe strongly, as somebody who's a security intelligence defense guy, it's in our interest for Israel to defeat Hamas. If Israel doesn't emerge as a victor, this will be terrible for American national security interests. It will be terrible for deterrence, both America and for Israel. And the one thing we refuse to do, because we can't handle the truth, to take an old phrase out, we cannot connect the dots to Iran, whether through Hezbollah or the Houthis or Hamas. Again, if you cannot connect the dots to Iran, you're not going to make any real progress going on here. So this is somebody who I was with a couple of weeks ago, one of my good friends, Yossi Kupavasa, who's the former head of military intelligence for the IDF. He said the key for Israelis is to convince America that defeating Hamas is the key for regional security. It's not a premature end of this war. A decisive victory against Iran, and you got to bring back Iran, means a clear outcome that Israel's the victor in the Gaza war. And this extends all to what's going on, and I'll show you what Mandel is in the Houthis. Secretary of State Blinken dangled last month to the Israelis. We will make normalization a priority, maybe even happen almost right away if Israel stopped immediately. Israel rejected that. Now, this is a slide. I always like to be good. This is a slide I put on about 20 minutes ago. This is from NBC. Quote, U.S. weighs slowing or pausing some weapons deliveries to Israel as leverage to scale back war in Gaza. So will the president succumb to the pressure from the left wing of his party, where he's being called a genocide enabler? And it really is going to depend upon what polls show. President is a politician. They're all politicians, and they all want to win. I will tell you that the head of the Harris poll, Mark Penn, said that actually the president being supportive of Israel is more important than losing young voters, but that is still controversial. So this is one of the slides you should just know and remember. Those are the three chokehold points. To the right, you know the Straits of Hormuz between Oman and Iran. 40% of fossil fuels, gas, oil go through there. The upper left, the 40% of trade between Europe and Asia goes through the Suez Canal. But the one on the bottom I mentioned before is Bab el-Mandeb. That's next to the Houthis, and another chokehold point that the Houthis are taking advantage of, shooting at American international shipping. So I wanted to jump something I would normally put at the end. So what does Israel need at the end of this war? And I believe American Israeli interests are coincident, and I believe these should be American interests. A clear victory is an American interest, a clear Israeli victory. We have to connect the dots to Iran. In the north, the Hezbollah have to follow United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, done in 2006 after the Second Lebanon War, where the Hezbollah Radwan forces have to withdraw 20 miles north of the Litani River. Real problem there is the tunnel infrastructure in southern Lebanon would remain intact. That's a real problem. I talked about controlling the Philadelphia corridor. I'll show you that map in a second. It's interesting. I wrote this slide before a couple of days ago. I wrote this a week or two ago, and I said reformation of the Palestinian educational system and changing UNRWA, United Nations Works and Relief Agency, that propagates this war, because they are a unique refugee agency just for Palestinians that gets more money per refugee than any other refugee than any other in the world. Every other refugee in the world, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, gets less money, and the mandate is to resettle them. Here, the mandate is to propagate descendants of refugees in perpetuity against Israel. And we go on to some of these maps I want to show you. So just the map on the right just shows the areas that of the highest population density within Gaza. And you can see in the north where Israel has done most of its work in Gaza and Jabalia and Betleah. You can see the center part, which Israel does not have in control. And then you can see the southern part, where it's Khan Yunis, where Israel is working now feverishly. But maybe the most important is Rafah. And if you look to the left, that's a blow up near Rafah. That is the 8.9-mile Philadelphia corridor. That is where they got all their arms and built this multi-billion-dollar terror infrastructure and got their arms in. And if you look at the bottom right corner, bottom left corner, I'm sorry, you can see Kerem Shalom. That is where the Israeli entrance is into Gaza for humanitarian aid. The civilians who are fighting for the hostages are blocking it, not letting humanitarian aid in until they can get at least proof of life of the hostages. But I heard this morning that the Israeli government is going to make it a restricted zone and not let the families block humanitarian aid. Obviously, these are very difficult discussions. If you want to take a look at how much Israel really controls at this point, take a look at this map. Everything in red is where Israel above ground, remember, above ground, basically controls. Below ground, it controls minimal amount in the center and the south. And even in Gaza City, there are still plenty of tunnels. This is one of the maps that is used. And if you look to the right side of the map, that is the major tunnel networks that are believed in the southern part. The one to the left of the slide is the tunnel networks that Israel has made significant inroads to. And this will show you the amount of damage that everything in pink that has been done and the devastation that has been done of a terrorist army built totally within a civilian infrastructure. At the end of the day, the picture on the right is where it was what the Israelis would like to a certain degree. If you look, you can see Gaza, and you can see a peak area that's actually large, but Israel would like to have a buffer zone between its communities that it's going to bring back and Gaza. The American administration is totally against that. I was kind of appalled after Israel lost the 21 soldiers in the blowing up of a structure that was in that future buffer zone, that the Times basically said, well, they were committing a war crime. The bodies hadn't been buried yet, that they were committing a war crime by blowing up those tunnels. So to try to paint it that it was anything but a tragedy. On the left is what Israel needs in the north, and that is the United Nations Security Council 1701 buffer zone to the Litani River to have, and that's what's supposed to be, and by the way, that was signed on to by the Russians and the Chinese in 2006. It was unanimous in the Security Council that after the 2006 war, there would be no Hezbollah troops down there. So a couple of things that are not kind of talked about: extraditions and targeted assassinations. So one of the things that I believe, so you have a picture here of the head of Hamas political is Haniya. He made a speech last week, and everybody wants it, you could write to me. It's a 5-minute speech in front of Islamic scholars, thousands of them, in Doha, in Qatar, raising money for Hamas. You know, Qatar has been painted as this wonderful intermediary, a major American non-NATO ally, as the president designated it a year or two ago. But it's a big difference between talking to the terrorists and hosting them, and worst, supporting them. Just remember what happened with Hamas killed 22 Americans, and 6 are still being held hostage as dual citizens. So Israel has been looking for targeted assassinations. This is Al-Aruri. He had spent a lot of his time planning terrorist attacks from Turkey. But then he went to Lebanon, and that's where Israel struck him down. He is the one who forces the relationships, coordinating between Hamas, Iran, and Hezbollah. So who's the next target? So I figure this is something maybe you don't know. This is the CEO of Hamas. He manages their financial relationship with Iran. He's the one who gets the cash into Gaza from Iran. Israel fears that even if it destroys Hamas and their presence, if they don't destroy the financial network, this will all come back. So this is somebody on the Israel targeted list. And here is the other big name who's been infamous. Here's this picture on the left. This is Mohammed Deif. The picture on the right, Israel published a little while ago, a couple of weeks ago. This is what he supposedly looks like now after surgery. Obviously, he and Sinwar are the two most wanted in Israel. So a little bit of the sobering part. Israel can, if America lets them, win this war. But can it win the peace? Peace is not going to occur. And the president pushing for moving to a two-state solution sooner than later, and I'll address that a little later. It can't come unless the Palestinians change. And I talked to the Palestinians. I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, I had dinner with the leader of the alternate Fatah party, who they just can't give up on the right of return. Can they accept a Jewish state and demilitarize? I don't necessarily believe at this point of time they can, after generations of indoctrination. And I'm not talking about just Gaza, I'm talking about Palestinians in the West Bank. So what's off the radar? Again, trying to go beyond what we all read in the headlines. The West Bank. The reason the West Bank hasn't exploded is Israel has security control there. Every day, for years before October 7th, Israel has gone in and taken out terrorists, taken them out. There are a couple of thousand, at least, in Israeli jails since October 7th. That is why the West Bank, Jenin, Qalqilia, Tukram have not exploded. Or else, if Israel was not doing that, if this was under the control of Hamas like Gaza, there would be terrorist suicide bombings every day in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. At the end of the day, for the foreseeable future, Israel has got to have security control in Gaza. If nothing else, for the families that are going to be returning to the Gaza envelope. And also, Israel has increased its strikes in Syria and in Lebanon. And this is a lot of moving targets. On December 25th, Israel killed a major Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps player involved in the weapons transfers. Just think about the weapons transfers from 2006 to today, 150,000 missiles, many precision guided, that could hit every place in Israel, moved from Iran through Syria to Lebanon by different means. And the UN presence there stopped. It's a very easy number to remember, 0. And again, we need to sometimes remember when we're watching all the horrific images of what goes on about humanitarian issues, who Hamas is. Hamas, and this is going to be an article I'm writing now, they use civilians, some willingly, some coerced. They have women and elderly and children who act as scouts. They employ child soldiers, another war crime. The Hamas Charter, which doesn't really get publicized at all, and it should be repeated again and again in all the articles. When was the last time you remember in the last 3 months that they talked about what Hamas really is? Israel will exist until Islam will obliterate it. The day of judgment will not come until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Our struggle against the Jews is very great. We need every inch of Palestine. This is one of the weaponized terrorist psychological warfare photos of kidnapped children. What has Hamas done? This is not new. Way pre-October 7th, they were the leaders of suicide bombing. Their goal is clear. They want to kill Jews. And they have said this is, I just grabbed one of the many things, slaughter every Jew on the planet. This is from 2019. And the child on the left is still in captivity, that's Kfar Bibis. He's now 1 year old. He celebrated his first birthday in Hamas cut. Let me go to the next one. And people say, well, maybe Hamas has changed. Hamas has said, we will do this again and again and again. And the president has acknowledged that. Now, I'm going to show you some video in a little bit. I'll give you a trigger warning before you see it. But I watched the full 48 minutes of the massacre that's been shown to some journalists and was shown in the Senate. Many people couldn't watch it. The Hamas massacre footage, what it really shows when you watch it, besides the atrocities, is religious fanaticism, tying this all in, that Hamas is part of radical Islamism, a Sunni version, no different than ISIS and Al-Qaeda, matched with common interests with the Shiite version of Hezbollah and Iran. It became very clear what this war was about. You saw people, civilians, running, screaming, God is great in Arabic, Allah Akbar. The civilians were part of the massacres, the mutilations, the looting, the brutalization, the torture. And you realize, yes, this is an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but this is a battle in a much larger war against radical Islamism. It's no different to think of Hamas as you would think about ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram or Taliban. or Iran. Problem is sobering. We can't destroy radical ideology, but you can, if given the time, destroy Hamas leadership and infrastructure, just as our country did in Mosul and Fallujah with ISIS and Iraq and in Syria. I've been trying to get the Israelis to release this film. It is so painful for the Israelis, right through left. They don't want the images to come out. It is so painful. I'll just tell you one anecdote. About 2 months ago, I spoke to Israeli PhD students studying in the United States, and they just did not want to see any of the images. Everybody's 1 degree of separation from what's going on. And what I watched in the video, I thought it was about radical Islamism, but what I saw, and you realize it's hunting Jews, no different than the Nazis. This poor young woman is still in captivity, Nama, and that was unfortunately one of the horrific pictures to the left after she was brutalized by Hamas, and she's still there. I will tell you, in the 48 minutes I watched, I was on the 18th iteration of the 48 minutes, because the families, even with blurred images of the violence, of the sexual violence that was done, have asked that they be taken out, and there's been respect from the families. I work with a woman who's professionally works against sex trafficking and women's rights, and she is having the hardest time getting women's rights groups to sign on, even today, against what Hamas did in using sexual violence in war. And these are some of the faces that are still in captivity, some of the young women who are there. So I show what I'm about to show you to college students. Why? Because they need to see it. Pro-Palestinian Hamas sympathizers. By the way, when you see these protesters, don't call them pro-Palestinian. They are pro-Hamas. And they are removing images from social media. They're claiming this was a false flag operation. The Israelis did this. Or Al Jazeera even mentioned this was all created by artificial intelligence. So why do we need to say it? January 20th, I wrote yesterday because I gave another lecture last week, but January 20th, Hamas' first public statement about October 7th, it was normal, necessary step. Why? Because journalists are questioning the scale and depravity of what happened. On college campuses, they're calling it propaganda, tearing down those posters. These pro-Hamas protesters are defending rapists and terrorists. This was a young woman with cerebral palsy that was killed in the concert. So this is your trigger warning. It's about a little under 2 minutes. This is a short version of what happened on October 7th. And if you want to look away now, you can, but I think it's important that you see what it is. The hostages are continually being brutalized. I talk with my friend, my colleague, who the Israelis are desperate to get the female hostages out because they are continually being raped, and they would like them to be able to terminate their pregnancies before it's too late. And the male hostages are being raped also to humiliate them. Senators saw these pictures. Senator Rosen, a Democrat from a very good supporter of Israel from Nevada, said Israel, after watching this tape when she came out, Israel has to protect themselves and the world from the brutal terror of Hamas. Senator Rubio, when he came out, said there are those who wish to deny what happened. We need to let the world know what happened. It's important to see it in real time, what I showed you, because Hamas has vowed to repeat it. One thing that struck me is how proud and gleeful these people were about what they were doing to unarmed civilians, children, people. The day after, what is the day after? What about the Palestinian Authority? They have a 90% unfavorable rating amongst Palestinians. I meet with them. Here I am in front of the PLO headquarters. Here I am with international lawyers in the Philippines and Australia. I'm at the PLO headquarters, meeting with the Palestinian Authority negotiating team. There's a contest who who gets more credit for what happened on October 7th. Remember, President Abbas, Abu Mazen, is head of not only the Palestinian Authority, he's also the head of Fatah, he's also the head of the PLO. The Fatah military wing claims it was part of the massacre. This is their image on their homepage, published by Palestinian Media Watch. We're fighting with the rest of the resistance fractions. The Fatah spokesman thanked Allah for the massacre for, quote, remember, this is Fatah, Abbas's party, the one the PA, what the Palestinian authority is, humiliating and defeating the Zionists. We're fighting, it's saying that we're fighting with Hamas in a joint operation room. This was one of the most senior Fatah leaders, Jibril Rajoud. He's Secretary General of Fatah's Central Committee. He said Hamas is part of our political and social network. What happened on October 7th was a war of defense. It's full of acts of heroism. And look at how long they've been waging this war, 75 years. This is not about when Israel conquered the disputed occupied territories in 1967. 75 years goes back to Israel's existence. That's what this has made very clear. Rajoub has said he called al-Aruri, who's one of the most notorious terrorists in the world, like Soleimani, an extraordinary leader. And he says, I am among his believers of his ideology, Hamas ideology, his way. This is a leader of Fatah. His passing is a loss for Fatah. And I want to just show you this picture. This is not Gaza. This is, again, the religious connotations. This is within the West Bank. If I can get this on. The point is that, trying to get this to the next one. Let me just see if I can escape from that. Sorry, hang on a second, guys. Let's see if I can just blow this up again. Play from current slide. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Next thing. Our American taxpayers' dollars pay and incentivize terrorism. How? Because even terrorists from October 7th, according to Palestinian Authority law, will be compensated. So that infamous terrorist who called home to his family, speaking to his mother, we have the recordings, I killed 10 Jews with my own hands, his family will receive money. This is a $300+ million per year operation called Pay for Slay, depending upon the more egregious terrorist act you commit against Jews, and the longer your prison sentence, the more money you make. And if you die, your family is taken care of for life. We have a law that is not being followed called the Taylor Force Act. Taylor Force was an American soldier who was killed. He was a reservist at the time. He was killed in Jaffa. And after he was killed, we found out that Palestinian terrorists were being paid with U.S. funds. And so a law was made that we should not give money to the Palestinian Authority until they stop this, as they say, paying their martyrs, the terrorists. One is exactly the same. But we allow money to still go to the Palestinian Authority despite incentivizing terrorism. And there's the formula. These pictures are not of Gaza. These are pictures of glorifying terrorists in the West Bank. This is the Palestinian Authority denying it committed the music festival massacre. They said that it was Israeli helicopters that did it. And in the Palestinian Authority, there is endemic incitement. When I go there, there is never a map of two states for two peoples. Before this war, 72% of Palestinians, this is from a respected Palestinian pollster, they thought that they opposed surrender of armed members in whether it's Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad and their weapons. And they said that the Palestinian Authority has no right to stop attacks against Israelis. And just as a reminder, is this territorial or not? This is existential. If this was about two states for two peoples, this could have ended in 47. It could have ended in 2000. It could have ended in 2001, in 1967. In 2008, when Prime Minister Omer offered 100% of the West Bank with land swaps and East Jerusalem was the capital, Abbas never responded. How do I know this? I interviewed the cartographer in the room, Danny Tarzo. And this is why Israel is so fearful. That's the West Bank on the bottom part of our screen. Just a few miles, easy Katyusha missiles to 80% of the Israeli population. End result, if you want peace at the end of this, and we're nowhere near that, accept a Jewish state, no right of return, and sign an end of conflict agreement. I had this discussion with President Clinton, who said that Ehud Barak was insistent that at the end they can't say there's more to discuss if they sign an agreement at the end. But yet when I go to the Gulf nations, they have no love for the Palestinians, and they had been decreasing aid before October 7th because they knew it was being squandered by the corrupt Palestinian Authority. Which brings us to the north. This was my article for The Hill, that we, America, must plan for a war, an Israeli war with Hezbollah, because Israel cannot allow Hezbollah to be in the north, south of the Litani River. Hezbollah, we keep listening. Don't be fooled. People say, will Hezbollah attack? Israel not attack? Tactically, Hezbollah can attack. But a decision for a major war will come only through Iran, because Hezbollah follows exactly what the Supreme Leader says by something called guardianship of the jurist. They are a division of Iran, unlike Hamas, which sometimes can do things independently. And Nasrallah makes it very clear, everything comes from Iran. These are my pictures, and this is pre-October 7th, where the Hezbollah was bringing people right up to the border to see how far they can get. And and Israel ignored it. I was there right before October 7th in Sheba Farms in Har Dov with a Hezbollah tent right in areas that were Israeli, that Israel didn't destroy, trying to look the other way. That's a house on the left in Israel that Israel knew pre-October 7th that there were Hezbollah terrorists in there and didn't want to make waves and just monitor it and didn't get rid of them. And that's my picture looking actually into beautiful Lebanon. I've been to the tunnels, the sophisticated tunnels, this one 20 stories deep, in Hezbollah tunnel system, maybe more sophisticated than Hamas's tunnel system. And why? If we tie this to Iran, Iran's grand strategy is to encircle Israel. It controls basically Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. And it has its eyes on Jordan and the West Bank. And that's why the Jordan River Valley has to be controlled by Israel, because you cannot allow Jordan to go down, and it's a very fragile state, and then threaten the West Bank. We know about Hezbollah's missile range. It could hit anywhere because of precision-guided missiles. And our former head of CENTCOM talks about not just Hezbollah's reach, but the overwhelming ability of Iran's reach with missiles. And Hezbollah's human shields, we know about Hamas's human shields. Look at this. Here's a weapons storehouse next to a school. Here is a precision-guided missile site next to a gas company in a civilian area. Can you imagine this legitimate military target if Israel hit it? The devastation in a civilian area. And while all this is going on, Iran, and this is why I think Iran is involved in this, its nuclear program has been accelerating. And you have to remember who Iran is. This is a rational actor based upon radical Islamism. It is a fundamentalist revolutionary movement that is the Gordian knot to untie, not the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Iranians are. Its mission is about spreading 12 Shiism throughout the world. The current president, Raisi, who's the most likely candidate to become the next supreme leader, was known as the butcher of Tehran in killing thousands of opposition leaders. And I work with Iranian activists who work with the protesters. So why does Iran want nuclear weapons beyond the obvious? They want to make themselves immune to regime change and to intimidate America, Israel, Saudis, the Gulf, and everybody else. They want to They have a hegemonic ambition of what's going on. And while this war has been going on, they've obstructed nuclear inspectors, expanded stockpiles of enriched uranium. They've transferred highly enriched uranium from gas into metal, the final step of weaponization. Just remember, this is just to remember, there are three parts to a nuclear program. Part one, getting the enriched uranium. That's a done deal. They can do that. They can have enough enriched uranium for 3 bombs in under a month. They have the means to deliver them. They have the ballistic missiles. What they don't have yet is believed is the weaponization to compartmentalize that gas into metal to make it grapefruit-sized objects to put it on the top of a nuclear weapon. They're going to need a nuclear test for that. I spoke to American intelligence sources because much of the information they've gotten is from the North Koreans, and they have had lots of failures, even though they do have a huge nuclear arsenal at this point of time. Amos Yadlin, former IDF intelligence chief, he says maybe we should just focus on the weaponization part. And I was on television a couple of weeks ago with Oli Heinonen, a former head of IAEI, the international organization that monitors, and he says the area to weaponize is such that you could do it in a small room. And so that means the ability to hide would be very, very small. And I will tell you, this is Robert Malley, who is negotiating with from our country to the Iranians, who's now been suspended, supposedly, I don't know for sure, for handing kind of secrets to the Iranians or sharing things he shouldn't have. Nobody knows for sure. But one of the things that he had done was negotiated the release of frozen funds that were in South Korea, Iranian frozen funds. And that $6 billion actually never made it to the because of October 7th, never made it to Iran. But there's even more than 10 billion that is going to be released from Iraq to Iran to pay for electricity. We should be fighting against this. It doesn't make headlines in the New York Times. And for Iran, I just want to talk about a couple of things beyond the nuclear. And this is why Israel has to come out a winner in this Hamas war, because people won't want to align with Israel or the United States, because Saudi Arabia before October 7th didn't trust the United States, and they were having rapprochement with Iran and developing relations against America's #1 world adversary, China. This is what Rob Satlow said, why they did this pre-October 7th, because America had no plans, serious plans to stop the Iranian nuclear progress, and Saudis thought they had to accommodate the Iranians. But there's no doubt the Saudis see Iran as their long-term enemy. This is what Mark Dubowitz, the head of Defense of Democracy, said, that the Saudis don't trust Washington, and I know that. I've met with the Saudis. And what the Saudis want at the end of this, if Israel is perceived strong, they want security guarantees for us. They want America to guarantee their security like we guarantee it with South Korea or with Japan. That's a big ask. They want a civilian nuclear program. And that's another tough ask, especially this is where most of the 9/11 terrorists came from. It's a hard thing for many people to accept. And they want fewer restrictions on U.S. arms sales. This is a world of authoritarians. Israel is, you have to play real politique. The authoritarian that wants to be our friend is the one we're going to have to work with. If Israel does not emerge victorious, then China, Russia, and Iran win. American influence is down. Other earthquakes. Iran is buying Su-35 and S-400 anti-missile systems from Russia. This could change the equation about America and Israel if it has to hit an Iranian nuclear program. Look at the size of these tunnels in Iran. Also, that captured equipment, if U.S. equipment in Ukraine is being sent back to Iran to be reverse engineered, this is an explanation why Israel did not send Iron Dome to Ukraine. It was afraid it would get in the hands of Iran through Russia. And there's been much targeting of Jews around the world. There's been 27 known Mossad and European allied security services. 27 attacks have been stopped around the world, from Europe to Cyprus to South America. And it gets back to the big question: can Israel preemptively strike as Israel did in Iraq and in Syria? And that goes to the Begin doctrine. You can't have a mortal enemy have nuclear weapons. Israel takes what the supreme leader says seriously. The elimination of a Zionist entity, Israel is a Zionist, is a cancerous growth. It must be destroyed. This is a missile last year in Hebrew saying about death to Israel. And this is the current head of Mossad, who is saying we will never let them have nuclear weapons. Is that talk, or is that something still on the table? And these are just, I want to just show some of how hard it is, even with American bunker buster made missiles, which Israel doesn't have, how deeply penetrated the nuclear system is. Look at the size of these tunnels. Look with the ballistic missiles in there. I want to move ahead. Regarding destroying their nuclear capabilities, even this is something, here's Yair Lapid saying he's the one thing that he and Bibi agree upon, that no Israeli government will agree to Iran becoming nuclear. Don't put that out of your mind while the Hamas and future full-time Hezbollah war is there. This is a book I did the review for this book. You may have read it if you're on my distribution list. Please get on my distribution list. It is an amazing book of how Israel has targeted Tehran over the last 10 years. Many things I did not know myself, done by Yonah Jeremy Bob, who is the Jerusalem Post military intelligence person. I know both he and Ilan Avatar, the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Report, where I'm the senior security editor. I just want to remind you what we wanted in that Iran deal. And this will come up again sooner or later. President Obama had said that no deal is better than a bad deal. It's supposed to end their nuclear program. The deal never was supposed to do that. And you could think we're at 2024 now. It would have given them a internationally legitimized industrial-sized nuclear program by 2030. And the main thing people forget, it gave a terrorist state the right to enrich. No other state was given the right to enrich that wasn't one of the big boys, China or France or Russia. And there were no inspections at military strikes. So this is the guy who was on television with Oli Heinonen, former deputy of the IAEA. He says, if you want to have a verifiable long-term agreement, it has to be credible monitoring, access to everything, and nuclear weapon activity, the weaponization terminated. A big ask, not happening anytime in the near future. And American policy regarding Iran must change overall. And this is what I speak to Congress about. We have to end the nuclear-centric approach to Iran and look at all of their nefarious activities, especially after October 7th. And as they say, I work with Iranian activists. This is meeting in Iraq with Iranian Kurds who are trying to fight against the Iranian regime. And the amount of brutality in Iran against its people is horrific, and we don't talk about it. It is something that we should be ashamed of. These are two young women, microbiology and a biomedical engineering student, who were kidnapped during the protests of just 2-3 years ago. We don't know where they are. And so what I would say at the end, it sounds very provocative, American policy should be about regime change. That's what will change the Middle East, not solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One of the people at the Kennedy School of Government who's done research is that most regime change / coups are non-kinetic without military. We should be supporting the Iranian people to take charge of their lives, who are probably the most pro-Western in the Muslim world. Final thoughts on this before I'll do a little bit on anti-Semitism for about 5 minutes. It is an existential threat. Before October 7th, the only existential threat was the nuclear program. Today, Israel's in an existential 1948 war. Israel cannot be perceived as weak after this war. And Iran is the biggest part of what's going on. River to the sea means the destruction of Israel. That is a call for genocide. For Israelis, they are going to be scarred for generations by October 7th. Just a little bit. I spoke this summer. I was asked to speak to the American Embassy in Oman and their Arab and Muslim employees on anti-Semitism. The president had just created a strategy on anti-Semitism. Why was it needed before October 7th? We know why it's needed after. Because most hate crimes per 100,000 pre-October 7th are against Jews. Most religious hate crimes, and those statistics on the right, just to show you this is the statistics is from 2013, 60% of religious hate crimes are against Jews. You know, every time there's something in a university where they say we need to have something about anti-Semitism, okay, we also have to have about Islamophobia. Most hate crimes are against Jews. You add everybody else up in the world, most are against Jews. That is not acknowledged. It's going to go a little bit. Again, to prove that before 2017, you can see anti-Semitism incidents are going up. What the president didn't accept and only prioritize is the definition, and this is what needs to be the litmus test, is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition as the litmus test for anti-Semitism. President bowed to the anti-Zionist wing of his party that says anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitic. Yet the State Department definition is closer. I'm going to skip CARE, which is a horrific organization, but I want to talk about the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. And if you look at the bottom, if you say Israel doesn't have a right to exist, anti-Zionism, that is anti-Semitism. And if Israel has double standards against it, that's anti-Semitism. This was President Schumer's speech on the Senate floor. He said most of the anti-Semitism, he was ashamed to say, was coming from his own side. So is there a difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? If you demonize and you call Israelis Nazis, Zionism is a disease, that's anti-Semitism, comparing Gaza to Auschwitz. If you have a standard against Israel, not against other countries, that's anti-Semitism. The United Nations is the very definition of that. Worldwide protests the first week after the tragedy of October 7th. Most protests before Israel even began an operation were against Israel, October 7th. This is 69%. Now it's over 95%. And anti-Semitism on college campuses, nothing new. I worked with Stand With Us. I was chair and co-chair for over 10 years in the Northeast. Anti-Semitism on college campuses has been going on a long time. You know, you would say on a college campus that you call somebody by the wrong pronoun, you could be thrown out of school, suspended. But macroaggressions of anti-Semitism, violence, intimidation are tolerated by cowardly administrators. And they were cloaked in the guise of anti-Zionism, which was called anti-colonialism, and was led by groups like Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace. And professors became activists, not educators. It's been in plain sight for generations. This is before October 7th. 75% of Jewish students said it was a very serious problem. And the lead of this was to boycott Israel. It wasn't just boycotting the West Bank. It was boycotting all of Israel. And the president said and the State Department against BDS. The former co-founder of BDS said, this is not about two states boycotting Israel's goods in the West Bank. It's about no Israel. It's about a Palestine next to a Palestine. And with his BDS and Students for Justice in Palestine, pre-October 7th, you have a much higher chance of anti-Semitism. So I've spoken to 11. This is where I'm going to sort of end. I'm going to just show you. So these are the universities that I have been at and spoken at or Zoomed at in the last 4 months. The claims that Israel is committing genocide from people like Rashida Tlaib. The president very courageously has said, if anybody has genocidal intentions, it's Hamas. Make no mistake about it. If we're going to use that term, fine, but let's use it appropriately. It's against the people who want to wipe Israel off the map. Which brings us, and again, the last few slides, to an explosion of Jewish hatred on America's universities. We know all about the videos that happened, on Congress with the president of Penn, Harvard,
at Penn.
But the new semester, and this is where I'll end, looks like the last semester. This is Lawrence Summers, former to the right, former head of president of Harvard, who said the choice of Professor Derek Pensler to replace Claudine Gay was totally inappropriate. It should be changed because Pensler has called Israel settler colonialism, Jewish supremacism. It's a region of apartheid. So this is who they have replaced with Claudine Gay. At Columbia, there are banned organizations now, Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice of Peace. January 24th, a few days ago, they were back out there, no consequences on them, even though they're banned. And they are protesting, calling for intifada. The Columbia Law School has invited an anti-Israel speaker to come soon. And there's a new law school group in Columbia called Law Students Against Anti-Semitism. They are being stopped by the Senate from being able to form. And is Cornell next? This was an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday that donors are trying to get rid of. And I work with the Cornell parents, many of them, to fire President Pollock and Provost Kotkilov. So I'm going to end it there. And Alan, I'm going to hit stop share. And you can ask me some questions. I told you I would need an hour. I got exactly an hour.
Before we conclude, at the end, I don't want to miss an opportunity for Eric to show people how they can get on your list.
Oh, okay. Let me just go right to the end here. Okay, hang on. There we go. Okay, can I share screen again? Can you see that? Alan?
I see you. I see.
Yeah, we do not see it.
We do not see it. Okay, so how do I
Would it be
go?
easier for you to do it at the end? So
Okay, I'll do it at the very end. Okay, that's good. Okay.
I don't want people to miss the opportunity.
Okay, thanks.
I have a number of questions. I want to urge people to ask their questions, but using the chat screen and chat function and ask me the question. First, dealing with the situation on the ground and what Israel is facing. Israel's always had a policy of first strike because they don't have room to maneuver within their borders. Is it anticipated, or is it your anticipation that Israel will indeed be the first strike in Lebanon?
Very good question. So whoever asked the question is correct. Israel, everything was based upon Israel doing the first strike and having short wars because it's a civilian reservist army and it has no strategic depth. This is something Dory Gold and his think tank had written many policy papers about, that Israel needs strategic depth, even though it doesn't have much. And that's the idea of the buffer zones. So in the first week, many in Israel felt that was the opportunity to go and attack Hezbollah. Our administration, I think, made a quid pro quo with the Israelis, saying, do not strike here. We don't want a wider regional war. We'll give you much more leeway in your war with Hamas, but don't turn this into a major regional war in the north. We're going to bring another aircraft carrier division there. And Israel, I think, chose to prioritize with the United States what's just going on in the south. And that may be part of the reason that President Biden has given Israel so much leeway to this point before we get into the presidential season of what's there. But will there be a preemptive attack? That was the article I wrote in The Hill. I don't believe a nation is not a nation if its people cannot live within its borders. And if you have 100,000 people that can't return to their homes, then the buffer side is on your side. And then you're not much of a nation. And that tells the rest of the Middle East that you're weak. And it invites more violence. It invites more attacks. So I do believe that they will attack. Here's the exception. I said that Iran controls Hezbollah. Does Iran want, at this point of time, a major regional war that Israel maybe could significantly destroy Hezbollah stockpiles? Iran may not want that at this time. Why? Because they have not completed the weaponization of the nuclear weapons. And what does Hezbollah do for them? It's an insurance policy against an Israeli preemptive attacks, because they can devastate with their missiles and overwhelm Israel's anti-missile system and hit the Kiryat, get the Azareli towers, it could hit the Knesset, Dimona, and they really could, with their precision-guided missiles, hit all of those places. So I don't think there would be a war if Iran has made the decision that it doesn't want to unleash Hezbollah at this point of time. Now, tactically, Hezbollah could do things. Could this turn into a bigger war? Yes. If they hit accidentally Hezbollah a kindergarten and kill 30 kids in there, then Israel's going to have to respond. But at this point of time, Israel also would like to focus only on what's going on with Hamas, if it can. They may have missed their opportunity, though, to have that attack earlier on. It may have, in retrospect, be a mistake.
But does Israel, or can Israel, I'm not suggesting you control the government, but can Israel conclude that for the time being, Gaza isn't under sufficient control, at least from the standpoint of attacking Israel, that they have no alternative but to fight and initiate a fight with the North? And by the way, what you're describing is a situation where Israel, for an indefinite period of time, would have to live with foregoing the Litani River border.
Right. And again, so the Radwan forces, which with every Israel underestimated its enemy in the south being Hamas, that they could do what they did. They were prepared for the north with the Radwan forces. And so they know that the Radwan forces are much more sophisticated, and that they can do this. I can't see Israel going on for years living with those citizens not coming back. I think Israel, before we'll call it the September school year, has to have some clarity of what's going on. This regarding the South and Hamas and the hostage situation, we're all watching and listening. This is, a Sophie's choice, between destroying Hamas, which is what most Israelis want, and saving the hostages, which most Israelis want. And can you have both of those things? I don't know. I think they're going to need to stop. I think they're going. I think there is going to end up being a couple of months pause to get another 100 hostages out in the South.
Switching from strategy to tactics, is it possible that hostages are being smuggled out through Egypt, or is that just impossible?
No, it's totally possible. One of the things I actually work with the person, Gershon Sholem, who's one of the leading peace activists who negotiated the Shalit deal. He, we were texting this week, believes, as I do, that Sinwar is a true believer and is not going to necessarily leave until the last minute. But they're still getting arms through there. The Egyptian soldiers are looking the other way, being bribed, sympathetic, whatever it is. Can they get out? Absolutely. My feeling is I can't see Hamas giving up all the hostages because that's their leverage. And I can see them ending up in Iran or in Algeria or Libya or Lebanon, or some other place. But can they get them out? I have no doubt the answer would be yes.
Bribing the right guy.
Yeah. I mean, they're still getting, probably missiles and things going on. This is really where, and my article this past week really is about America has to, behind the scenes, really work with carrots and sticks with the Egyptians to get them to close those borders. I will tell you off the record, and I wrote it in my piece because I didn't name the source, but it was as the highest it could be, the thought was that the Egyptians had flooded the tunnels in the past, and that's why there supposedly wasn't going to be rearmament. I heard that never happened.
Really? Can Israel do anything once the energy, the gas, or the humanitarian aid crosses into Gaza? Can Israel affect how that is distributed to make sure Hamas is not, taking what they can for their own purposes and making sure that the humanitarian aid does not get to where it's intended?
So in a simple answer, no. The best Israel can do is to try to minimize overground that there's contraband, if you will, dual use type of things coming in. But no, once it goes there, Hezbollah's to this point in control of Rafah. It's in control of the Philadelphia corridor. It's controlling through the tunnel network under Khan Yunis and through much of central Gaza. No, I don't believe, and there's no authority to change that. That you have to assume those things are going to go to Hamas, and they will do what they please with them. and
Thank you.
hope the best that will help the innocent civilians.
What is, what's possible in terms of the domestic Israeli situation in terms of changing government before hostilities end? Uh, it's a fair assessment that many in Israel do not even trust this coalition government, this peacetime coalition, because so long as Prime Minister Netanyahu is part of the decision making. What are the options? What's possible?
Let me give you statistics. About 21% of Israelis support the current government. Yet, I think 75% of Israelis agree with the actions the current government is taking regarding Hamas. There is a schizophrenia that's there. Listen, I was teaching before October 7th on the judicial reform, through the Federation and Jewish Council of Community Relations. There is still those problems that are there, but the amazing cohesion and unity, let's not belittle that. The Israelis do come together. Can you, during time of war, have an election? Is it smart to have an election where people, the dysfunctional Israeli politics and how they go after each other personally? Will that kill the war effort? I'll just take off my hat. I'm not a huge Bibi fan. That's not on an ideology, but I do believe people need to go after a certain period of time. And the fact that last time I met with him, he screamed at me. So I'm not, but I won't take it personally. Yes, I am. But it's a very difficult situation here of the trust of the decisions. And Bibi is a smart guy. And I don't believe this war being prosecuted any differently if Benny Gantz or Yair Lapid were running. I really don't, although people might be easy to swallow. But it's going back to that Sophie's choice. Are you going to prioritize destroying Hamas, risking the hostages, many of which may be dead, and maybe what's been done to them, you can't even imagine, and destroying Hamas, or getting the hostages out and allowing Hamas at the end of the day to remain standing and claim victory? I'm a cold-hearted security person, and that's how I brief Congress. But on the human level, I'm pained. I see the devastation. I've visited in the ICU with the soldiers who have died. Those soldiers' families don't want their children who died in the war to die in vain, and leave Hamas standing. So it's not just the hostage families that are speaking up. It's the families who've lost people and want to destroy Hamas. The complexities here are so difficult. I wish it wasn't going into an American presidential season, because that's going to turn Israel again into a political football. I know I jumped a couple of degrees of separation there, but everything sort of plays in. You could ask a follow-up question there, Alan.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question and permit you to, if you're willing to, jump further and speculate how this war policy from the United States perspective would be conducted if Mr. Trump was in office versus Mr. Biden and the Democrats.
Right. So let's just talk facts. So it is. Many people liked President Trump because he did a lot of things regarding the embassy in Jerusalem as the capital and Golan. But there were many things in the Middle East that was also not so good from an Israeli perspective. He abandoned the Syrian Kurds to the Turks. There was an ethnic cleansing of hundreds of thousands of people. He abandoned the Saudis when the Iranians directly attacked the Aramco facilities in 2019. And that really told the Saudis, I was part of it, that America is an unreliable ally. By the way, if America puts pressure on Israel to stop, that's going to tell all of our allies around the world that America puts pressure on its allies and doesn't stand behind them. That will resonate all the way to Taipei and make it for President Xi. We'll hear that and American support for Taiwan and things like that. So these things go around. So President Trump is impulsive. He's transactional. Will he be we'll say, as good as he was before? I don't think anybody knows. I got booed at a Reform synagogue in New York during President Trump's term, where I said in his second term, this was before the election of 2020, that I don't know, he could be better, worse. You really don't know what you're going to get. As far as President Biden, I think you should give President Biden tremendous credit for sticking with Israel for as long as he has stuck with Israel. But I think now he's going to be putting pressure on Israel, and I think and what I tell Congress, and I work on both sides of the aisle, and I'm purely on the Middle East. I'm not talking domestic politics here. I think he's going to be putting lots of pressure on Israel, and I tell Congress, you've got to, for American national security interests, we have to come out victorious for Israel, and we have to back them up and let them do everything they need to do and not stop them prematurely. So what's going to happen? People listen to their echo chambers, Alan. They only hear one thing. They demonize the other side. It's kind of like Israeli politics pre-October 7th. It's going to be a very difficult situation, and I hope the president is going to be there for almost another year. We'll be there for a year. I hope he sticks with Israel for our interests, not for Israeli interests, for our interests.
I worked on Wall Street for most of my career, and on Wall Street, there's a saying, hope is not a strategy.
It's true, but I'm hoping.
Right. I have a request for you to share links to the disturbing video. Are you at?
Yes. So what happens is people can write to me. You can write this down. Let me just give you my email address just in case you have to leave sooner. My email address, it's all lowercase, is E.R. Mandel, Mandel, MD, like in medical doctor, at Gmail. ERMANDEL, MD at Gmail. I can send you that video. I could also send you Hania's 5-minute speech raising money for Hamas in Doha 2 weeks ago. I'm happy to, any way I could help. I am happy, to help. And again, I share facts in context. Hopefully, I give you my analysis, and you could do with it with what you are, and we'll leave it at that.
Thank you. You've spoken in the past about an Iranian island that should be attacked to stop Iran. Could you address that for those who have not heard about this? And also, a separate question, but related to the hostage issue. Is it possible there are hostages being used in Lebanon as shields?
I don't know. I have no knowledge of that. I do know there are tens of thousands of Lebanese civilians that are human shields. That I know very much. The first question, what was the first question again? It was regarding the second.
First question is about the island.
Okay, so I wrote a piece last week, and this goes to the greater question. Unless Iran pays consequences because it is basically in charge of so much of the instigation, if not direct complicity, of terrorism and anti-Israelism and anti-Americans in the world, then Iran will be happy to fight to the death of the last Arab in Iraq or Arab in Lebanon or in Yemen or whatever. Iran needs to pay a price. Now, let me talk before I get to the islands. Little dirty secret. America is not fully enforcing our oil sanctions against Iran. Iran is basically is sending as much oil at a discounted price to China and India at this point of time, which is filling its coffers. This is wrong. It should stop. We could have secondary sanctions against countries that break our primary sanctions. Why are we helping the Iranians in any shape, way, or form? Again, this is what the Achilles heel of American policy is. We think that if we don't poke the Iranians, that they will reciprocate. That should be been disabused a long time ago, which gets to what type of actions could one take. So there are two places that you could devastate Iran, and you don't even have to do it, but just send a message you're capable of. One is called Karg Island. This is in the Persian Gulf, and the other one's called Bandar Abbas. We're talking about their main container port, their naval port, and it's also their main fossil fuel shipping areas. If we sent a few missiles there, did minor damage, to say, unless you rein in the Houthis, unless you rein in Hezbollah, which they have direct control over, unless you start stopping your control of the Iraqi popular mobilization forces in Iraq that control Iraq, then we can devastate you. And that is the only thing Iran will respond to. Because there is one thing, even though they're incredibly ideologically motivated for their Twelver-Shiism, one thing brutal authoritarian despots want to do is remain in power. And if they think that they can be weakened, then they might respond. The other part we should do, they can't hate us anymore. We should say that it is American policy that we are pro-Iranian. Pro-Iranian means being for the Iranian people to take charge of their lives, and we should be with the Iranian people. We should not be on the side that's releasing billions of dollars in funds that it was either in South Korea or in Iraq or anything else to help the Iranian regime. We cannot change the Iranian regime. The people can. It can be. That should be our policy, our long-range policy. And if you don't tie if you don't tie all of these things together, and then you are going to end up with the true war that the president fears, a major regional war. The way to stop this is to let Iran know, both kinetically and enforcing sanctions, that we mean business. And the administration is not doing that. As brave and wonderful they are, I think giving Israel as much leash as they have with Hamas, is how wrong their policy is on Iran.
You and others have mentioned over the years that war in the Middle East can get very personal. I recall during the '82 war, in retaliation for kidnapping of I think it was a Russian officer, the Russians retaliated by kidnapping the nephew of one of the Muslims they were fighting, chieftains that they were fighting. In that vein, does Israel have the capacity to actually take the war? Forget about whether they would do it, to take the war not to Iran's facilities, military facilities, but to the holy city of Qom, and make if I'm mispronouncing the name, I apologize, to make it a very personal battle for the mullahs. Is that anything that's possible?
I just don't think Israel is a Jewish nation, and our Jewish values, whether you're secular or religious, would allow us to do something like that. We don't carpet bomb Dresden like, that went on in World War II, or Hiroshima. Israel doesn't indiscriminately target civilians. I know that. Israel is not going to target a city in Iran that doesn't have nuclear or military dimensions to it. Israel will targeted assassinations of nuclear scientists and things to slow them down. Terrorists, President Trump, who should be given credit for killing Soleimani, but that's just not who and what we are, and that's a disadvantage of, I think we as a Jewish nation, Jewish Americans of Jewish Christian ideals, it's not who we are, not what we do. But is the supreme leader who controls the IRGC and Hezbollah a target? Yeah, he's not a political person. He's as far as kind of military person. So I wouldn't have a problem there.
Not his nieces and nephews.
What was that?
Not his nieces and nephews.
No, I don't. Listen, Israel, there was a time Israel actually kidnapped some leaders in Lebanon and tried to make an exchange, and it didn't work out. Remember, you were dealing with people who were zealots also, and they want to survive, and they have this great idea of Islamic hegemony throughout the region, in their case, Shiite. They're rational, but they're not rational according to our Western sensibilities. And when we project our Western sensibilities on this part of the world, especially with Iran, we are going to fail, and we're going to hurt our interests, and there'll be much more violence.
A technical question about the parliamentary system as it applies to Israel. Could there be a change in government without an election, and how could that come about? Do you know?
I mean, it's possible that the current government could realign. I mean, if there was a vote of no confidence, and the government came down, but it seems that Bibi has just enough vote 61, 62, to keep things going. It is possible that that you can have a government if a few defectors left Likud, or one of the other parties. It's possible. I don't think it's likely. I do believe that Bibi will want to stay as long as he possibly can, and he'll fight that in every single thing. I don't necessarily think that's best for the country, but that's up to the Israelis. I'm an American, and as I say, he is not an incompetent leader in this sense at all. I mean, he may have other faults, but he's not incompetent, and I don't think the war, as I say, would be different if somebody else was running it at this point of time.
Behind the scenes, what is Russia's role in this war? What is Russia's involvement, control, if any, over Iran? What is Russia gaining from all this?
Well, Russia, like China, wants to poke a finger in America's eye. It's an axis of resistance: Iran, China, Russia. Iran is helping Russia with building drones, sending missiles to them. Does Russia have a lot of influence on Iran? It has some, but I don't think it really wants to influence them because Iran is undermining America. And I think it has no problem what's going on there. And people have forgotten about the Ukraine war. That's a whole other issue of what's there. Russia has come out much more against Israel since October 7th, but yet they're still allowing Israel to have its strikes in Syria because they don't want to risk their warm water base, or their air base in Kanium, or their warm water base in Tartus in Syria. So they have made major gains, and they don't want to risk those things. But Putin has not been what Israel would have been hoped for, more neutral against Israel, even though Israel has not backed up Ukrainians as much as the Americans have wanted them to do. So there's this game going on, but at least outwardly, Russia wants to hurt America, and hurting America means hurting Israel at this point of time.
Yeah.
I got one more question. Then
right.
I have to.
Can you suggest a clear response we all should give to others who are more upset with Israel's actions and the rising deaths in Gaza? And for that matter, what is your response, and what should our response be to what's going on in the West Bank and the violence that is alleged being committed against Palestinian settlers by out of control Palestinian residents of the West Bank by out of control settlers?
Okay. To make an equivalence, first of all, there are these hooligans in the West Bank that Israel should fully prosecute because they're breaking laws and attacking, and it's wrong. It is not it has been turned into something to make an equivalence compared to what Hamas is doing or Hezbollah. That's ludicrous. But there's no doubt it should be a black and white issue, that they should be arrested and charged fully to the level of Israeli law, and there's certainly laws that come doing that. But to make it equivalent and to deflect attention from what Hamas does, and can do, is a perversion of judgment there. Now, the first question relates to something I teach on, which is proportionality in war. Numbers will never be in Israel's favor. When you use human shields, we have no idea what the numbers really mean, because they count Palestinian terrorists, maybe 10,000 as part of the numbers. We don't know that. But every loss of every innocent life. Are all civilians innocent life? That sounds really provocative. That's my next article. There is a spectrum of Palestine, what Alan Dershowitz says, a continuum of complicity of civilians. But there are quite a few innocent civilians, and it's terrible. It is the currency of Hamas to weaponize the death of their own civilians to manipulate the West. And the West is more than happy to accept that. You can feel confident. Israel, and I've interviewed firsthand knowledge in war, watching Israel over 5 wars I've seen, interviewing Israel military ethicists, lawyers in doing it. I watched in 2014 with the Maglen unit. I interviewed them after they were fired from an UNRWA hospital from Hamas, and they lost 3 soldiers who had to go in and prove to the lawyer that there were terrorists inside an UNRWA hospital and there were tunnels. Israel does not target civilians, but by precautionary law, by just war theory, Israel is absolutely allowed to target civilian areas that have a military advantage that are part of war. And the deaths of those civilians, as tragic as they are on the people who put the civilians in harm's way. But Israel makes those judgments all the time. But when you have an enemy that doesn't use distinction, that civilians terrorists dressed as civilians blend back and forth, it is putting way too much pressure on Israel to know at all times about that. But I have no doubt that I want my American army to be as moral, and I've seen it, as the Israeli army. We should be proud of what they do and how they fight. If they weren't, and they really did what the Russians would do or the Chinese would do, this war would have been over already, and there'd be 150,000 dead civilians, but the war would be over. And Israel is losing soldiers and what goes on because of Israel's morality. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Eric, thank you very much. And you've even permitted us to go 3 minutes over your deadline. We look forward to hearing of your wisdom and knowledge in the future.
And anybody can write to me with more questions. I'm happy to answer. And hello to all my old friends out there.
Thank you.
Bye.
Signing off, be on the lookout for future events sponsored by the Israel Action Committee of the 5 synagogues. All the best. And thank you for the Hebrew Institute of White Plains for hosting behind the scenes and making everything work smoothly.